If you have your Bibles, open with me today to 2 Kings chapter 6. 2 Kings chapter 6. I'm going to do a lot of reading. It will also be up on the board for you. And we're going to be talking about eyes wide open. Eyes wide open. I feel like half of my life I've wandered around with my eyes about half shut. Do you ever wonder that? You're just going through and you're seeing just what it takes, just the minimum of what you have to see to make it through the day. You don't look into the eyes of people often. You don't pay attention to what's going on around. You don't really listen to hear when people are speaking. It's just and you're cordial and you got your own stuff to deal with. And so we have a tendency as human beings, and I know this. Thank you, brother. You are wonderful. Mostly my hands are just really cold. I don't know whether to hold it or just dip my fingers in there. I think most of the time, one of the reasons that we walk around with maybe self-imposed blinders, they're not always self-imposed, but we don't listen and we don't look and because we don't want to deal with reality. We've kind of got a level of what we feel comfortable in taking in, and so we look at people, we engage with people, but we don't really see people. We look at our life and we understand where we're at, and we kind of engage as much as is necessary to make it to the next day, but we don't see beyond our own little world. It's amazing to me how often in my life someone has come up to me and said, "Hey, did you hear about so-and-so? This happened," or "Did you see this?" And I'm like, "No." "Well, you were there." "Yeah. I was in my nothing box." Hey guys, women, do this. Guys, listen. Terry gave us at Man Cave the most awesome tool. It's called a nothing box. If you're driving down the road, you're sitting at the house and you do not want to talk, you don't have to, you just stare. And if your dear, lovely spouse says, "What are you thinking about?" say, "I'm in my nothing box." And for men, a nothing box is a real place. The problem is we have to look at life not through our nothing box, but with our eyes open. In this story, and I'm going to read a lot, we're going to start with 2 Kings chapter 6, verse 8. I'm going to read all the way to verse 23. It's a wonderful story about the prophet Elisha. Once when the king of Syria was warring against Israel, he took counsel with his servants, saying, "At such and such a place shall be my camp. But the man of God sent word to the king of Israel, 'Beware that you do not pass this place, for the Syrians are going down there.' And the king of Israel sent to the place about which the man of God told him. Thus he used to warn him, so that he saved himself there more than once or twice. And the mind of the king of Syria was greatly troubled because of this thing. And he called his servants and said, 'Will you not show me who of us is for the king of Israel?' And one of his servants said, 'None, my lord, O king, but Elisha the prophet, who is in Israel, tells the king of Israel the words that you speak in your bedroom.' And he said, 'Go and see where he is, that I may send and seize him.' It was told him, 'Behold, he is in Dothan.' So he sent there horses and chariots and a great army, and they came by night and surrounded the city." Quick backstory. The Syrians have been troubling Israel off and on for quite a long while. The king of Syria has taken it upon himself to start attacking and trying to enforce his rule over the land of Israel. The prophet Elisha, and remember, Elisha is the one that came after Elijah. When Elijah finished his work on earth and the Lord took Elijah home, he came in a fiery chariot and picked up Elijah. And when he was leaving, he dropped his cloak into the arms of Elisha. So that's where we get that taking up the cloak of someone. Elisha took the cloak and carried on as the prophet, the man of God. The king of Syria is planning on moving down, setting up camp so that he can attack. He's wanting to overtake Israel. And interestingly, every time he has a plan, God tells Elisha, Elisha tells the king of Israel, it doesn't work. So the king of Syria assumes that there is a spy in the kingdom that is reporting all of his actions and all of his plans. And there was a spy in Israel, Jehovah God. You see, Jehovah knew exactly every plan. So what the king decides is once they find out, hey, who is the spy? And everybody, all of his servants, like, hey, it ain't us, nobody. It's this prophet Elisha. And I find it interesting. He tells them everything you say in your bedroom. So you're making war plans? Really? Okay. What he's saying is everything that you are speaking in silence or in private among your peers, God is telling the prophet Elisha, and the prophet Elisha is telling. Now, this is an interesting thing for me. This is side note. This is not even in my notes. This is like a rabbit. Have you ever been in church at a revival meeting, at maybe here somewhere? I have. It's happened to me over the years. And the preacher starts preaching, and it's like somebody videotaped you last week. Every thought, every word, everything you did, sent it to the preacher, and he crafted a sermon based on your behavior last week. Anybody ever have this experience? Let me tell you what. God does not tell me what you do. Okay? I just want you to know that. And I don't have bugs in your house. I don't stalk you on Facebook much. I don't get into your business to figure out, but this I do know. Jehovah God is a spy in your life, and He knows everything that's going on. And He tells me, not specifically about you, He tells me about our issues. And the Holy Spirit brings a word from His word, and it corresponds. It's not like the preacher is trying to get you. It's like God knows where you are. And He cares. He cares. So they tell the king of Syria, he's in Dothan, Alabama. I have a lot of Free Will Baptist preacher friends from Dothan, Alabama, so I always give them tribute, Roll Tide, whatever that means. I guess so. He says, go and see where he is, that I may send and seize him, because I want to take this prophet so he can quit doing that. And they said he's in Dothan. So he sent there horses and chariots and a great army. Seriously sends horses and chariots and a great army to capture a prophet. That tells me that the king of Syria already understands the power of God takes a big army. So moving on, verse 15. When the servant of the man of God rose early in the morning and went out, behold, an army with horses and chariots was all around the city. And the servant said, alas, my master, what shall we do? Jeff version, holy cow, what's happening? The servant wakes up, he opens the window, first thing in the morning, looks out, and there is a vast army surrounding the city of Dothan with chariots and warriors and horses. What's his response? Alas, because that's what I would say. Alas, what shall we do? But that's really, he was scared. Because all he could see, all around him, as far as he could see, was the enemy. With chariots, horses, and soldiers. Elisha speaks. He said, do not be afraid, for those who are with us are more than those who are with them. And I have a feeling the servant's looking, 1, 2. You got an army I don't know about? He says, don't worry. Those that are with us, Not those that will be with us, not those that God will send. Notice what he says? Those that are what? What does that mean? They were already there. You see, the army of God was already there. So this is what I love. We're going to get to the part that I really want to talk about, eyes wide open. Here we go. Then Elisha prayed, verse 17, and said, "O Lord, please open his eyes that he may see." So the Lord opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw, and behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. He didn't see the army of Assyria anymore. He didn't see the Syrians. What did he see now? The army of God. I think that's fascinating. Let's read it again. And the Lord opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw, and behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. And when the Syrians came down against him, Elisha prayed to the Lord and said, "Please strike this people with blindness." So he struck them with blindness in accordance with to the prayer of Elisha. And Elisha said to them, "This is not the way, and this is not the city. Follow me, and I will bring you to the man that you seek." I did some research on this because that's what I should do. And the Hebrew word that they use it for the blindness that was put on the Syrian army doesn't necessarily indicate a physical blindness. Because I wanted to make sure, because if the whole army went blind and this guy says, "Here, I'll take you to who you're trying to find," they're not going to follow. But the blinders were put on and they didn't see things as they were. They didn't see things as they really were. Let me ask you, you ever had the blinders on? When what you saw was not really what was. So, God blinds the army. And Elisha says, "I'll take you to where you need to go." So verse 20, or at the end of that, he says, he led them to Samaria. As soon as they entered Samaria, Elisha said, "O Lord, open the eyes of these men that they may see." So the Lord opened their eyes, and they saw, and behold, they were in the midst of Samaria. This is not where they wanted to be. And soon, as the king of Israel saw them, he said to Elisha, "My father, shall I strike them down? Shall I strike them down?" And he answered, "You shall not strike them down. Would you strike down those whom you have taken captive with your own sword and with your bow?" He says, "You didn't do anything to bring them here. They're not your prisoners. Would you strike down those that you had taken? No. These are God's prisoners. Set bread and water before them that they may eat and drink and go to their masters." So he prepared them a great feast, and when they had eaten and drunk, he sent them away. They went to their master, and notice the last, what does it say? "And the Syrians did not come again on raids into the land of Israel." The enemy is out there. We are surrounded. I talk about spiritual warfare till I'm tired of talking about it, but the reason I do is because I don't think we understand the significance and the reality of it. I don't think that we see things with our eyes wide open. We see things through the physical sense, and we're constantly looking at life through the physical lens, and God is saying that will get you in trouble. When Elisha's servant opened the curtains, all he could see was the Syrian army. All he could see. And I want to ask us a question. What is it that we see? What do you see? Are we blind in the spiritual sense? Do we see things as God sees things, or do we see things as we choose to? And this is something that I also want to mention, that this type of spiritual blindness, having eyes that don't see, is a theme that runs through the New Testament as well. Paul talks about it in 2 Corinthians. He says that the God of this age has blinded the minds of unbelievers so that they cannot see the light of the gospel. The God of this age, Satan, has blinded the minds of people so they can't see. Do you believe that there is such a thing as a spiritual blinding? Yes. Who's affected by it? Well, it's them sinners. It's those folks out there that don't know Jesus, don't go to church. Some people haven't been baptized. No, do you know who it is? Human beings. If you don't think that a child of God can have spiritual blinders on and that the God of this world can blind the eyes of a child of God, then you are fooling yourself, because that is a tactic of warfare that he will use. And he gets us looking at things and focusing on little things here and little things there, and all we see is the problems. All we see is the problems. We never see God. We see the problems. Like the servant, he saw the army of Syria. And you know what? The same time he was looking at the army of Syria, do you know where the army of God was? Right there. It's not like he said, open his eyes so that when the army appears, he'll see them. The night that the Syrian army encompassed around the town of Dothan, the army of God was already there. Sometimes we call for the Lord to send his whatever, army, angels, you name it, fill in the blank to put, you know what? That's awesome. But I want to say, Lord, let me see who I know is already here. Amen. Because God has already got his army encamped around us. Mm-hmm. But we don't see them because we look through closed eyes. Oftentimes, all we see is the size and the strength of the enemy. We see the size and the strength of the enemy, the size and the strength of the problem. And I can't deal with this, and I can't fix that, and I can't, and I can't, and I can't. And it's debilitating when all we see is the problem and the enemy. I don't know where you're at. I don't know where your spiritual walk is. I don't know what you got going on in your personal life, in your emotional life, in your health. I don't know all of that. But this I do know, that Satan is going to bring his Syrian army and camp around you, and that's all he wants you to see, is the obstacles that you cannot overcome. So how do we overcome them? With our eyes wide open. When we open our spiritual eyes, we no longer see the size of the problem or the strength of the problem. We don't see the size of the enemy. We see the size of God. And we see the strength of God. We see the power of God. That's why Paul tells us that when we're running the race, that we should keep our eyes fixed on Jesus Christ. How many of y'all ever run a race, even if it was against your children across the backyard? I have, and I won, by the way. If you've ever run in a race, you'll learn that there's one thing that you cannot do, and that is you cannot run forward with your head turned around looking backwards, because trees and things get in the way. Your balance gets off. You crash and burn. One other thing that you can't do if you're going to be successful in running a race is look at the competition while you're running. What happens is that you wipe out in the parking lot out here and slide up under the rail. If you were at Man Cave, you know what that means. If not, I will tell you after church. But one of our brothers lost a race because he was looking at the young buck he was racing against. You see, you can't win a race looking backwards. You can't win a race looking this way and that way. The only way to win that race is to looking at the prize that you're going to, looking at the finish line. And if we're going to be spiritually victorious, we have to keep our eyes focused on Jesus Christ. And in this life, in our marriage, I want to say something. I'm thrilled that Braun and Jess are going to get certified. And that is a blessing in Marriage on the Rock. And let me just clarify. It's Marriage on the Rock. Singular. Not Marriage on the Rocks. That has a totally different meaning. It's Marriage on the Rock. The foundation of Jesus Christ. I'm grateful for that. Because do you know why? Because Satan is attacking families in our church and marriages in our church, and he is using the same tactics. He's keeping their eyes on the problems, keeping their eyes focused on the enemy when they should be focused on God. And it's not just marriage. It's health. It's relationships. It's finances. Hey, Dave Ramsey, God bless his soul, has caused me to sell stuff this week so that we can have financial peace. But you know what? There is peace in God's financial plan. But if I look at the problems, I've got a credit card in my pocket. I keep it. I'm supposed to cut it up. I do it just to be rebellious. But rebellion is witchcraft, the Bible says. So the other thing is it's the first time I've ever had one that was just my name on it. You know. I like that. But I've got this credit card, and I am going to cut it up when I'm ready. I've got to work my way up to it when I'm ready. At the big celebration party, I'm going to cut it up. Or yours, anyway. But we have these things, and we hold on to them because they think, we reason in our mind that if I do this, and I'm just using these as examples. There's tons of things that Satan has blinded us with that gives us comfort and strength, and we can depend on this. When the enemy comes, well, I've at least got this. And you know what? I want to be financially peaceful, but it's not just that. I want to be peaceful in my marriage. I want to be peaceful in my relationship with you guys. I want to be peaceful in my relationship with God. I love Brother Dale, and I appreciate his openness and honesty. I want to have that relationship with God, and I want to be at peace with me. Because the enemy wants to keep me at war with me. And most of the time, the war that I have is with me, and I take it out on her. And I blame whomever. And I say, no, it's their fault. He doesn't care who you blame. He just wants you to see the enemy. And he never wants you to look at God. If we're going to open our spiritual eyes, we have to be open to God's presence. I know we know this here because we know Scripture. And I know we know this, that God is everywhere at all times, right? That God always is, always has been, and there's nowhere that God is not. David summed it up in a beautiful psalm when he said, where can I go that I can be out of your presence? If I flee to the mountains, lo, you are there. If I go to the pits of hell, there you are. There's nowhere that I can escape from the presence of God. We know that God is continually in our presence, but we know that here. And Mama's not always in our presence. We know that in our head. But do we know it in our heart? You see, there's a disconnect between what we know and how we react. This is what we know. This is the knowledge that we have. But our reactions come from right here. And Elisha's servant knew the power of God. I want to remind you of some things in the life of Elisha. Naaman from the king of Syria, the general in the Syrian army came to Naaman. And he was a leper. And Elisha told him to dip in the river 7 times. Remember that? And Naaman was made clean. He'd seen Elisha do amazing things in faith. It was God working through the prophet Elisha. This servant, just prior to this, in the beginning of chapter 6, sees Elisha walk up and a young prophet at the prophet school, and I think that's awesome that they had a prophet school. The prophet school, a young prophet at the prophet school has got a borrowed axe, and he's using it, and the head comes off and goes in the water. Okay, what's the big deal? It's a borrowed axe. There was a time when you borrowed people's stuff and gave it back in better condition than when you got it. Like back in the days of Elisha. And so this young prophet is terrified because how's he going to repay this? I mean, what's he going to do? And Elisha walks up and the power of God comes over him and the axe head floats to the top of the water. So don't tell me that the servant doesn't know about the power of God, the strength of God, the abilities of God. He knows that here. But in the moment when he opens the window and sees the Syrian army, does he respond here or here? Straight out of his head. What are we going to do? Isn't that most often our response? Because we see the enemy, we see the problem, we see the obstacle, but what we don't see is the army of God that's already there. We don't see the power of God. Are you in tune to His presence? I want you to know more than in your head that God is with you at all times. That God is always with us, and God always is a step ahead of us in everything we do. We should fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, as I said earlier. And this is something I want to say. When we see God with eyes wide open, we come more in tune with the will of God and the plan of God. Think about Moses. He had a stuttering problem, stammering problem. He didn't talk well. I don't know what it was. He just said, I don't talk good. And he was terrified of going and speaking before Pharaoh. But he moved ahead. And he led the Israelites to freedom. Why? Because he saw God in a burning bush, and God said, this is what you're going to do. He saw the presence of God. And what did God do? He went with him. Think about when Joshua took over. He'd also told this to Moses. When Joshua took over the army, he's fixing to lead the army of Israel. We talked about that, I think, last year in my forever long Joshua series. It took me longer to preach the series than it did to write the book of Joshua. But we learned something, that God told Joshua, hey, don't be afraid. Be of strong courage, for I'm with you. Guys, I want us to understand something, that our eyes can only be opened spiritually when we see that God is with us. We understand that every step, every breath, everything, God is with us. The angels of the army of God surround our camp continuously. That gives me peace, does it you? Because this is what's awesome for me, is that God has got my back even when I don't know that it needs to be got. That was some good English, wasn't it, Mom? God is watching out for me, and God has a plan. You say, well, why is all this bad stuff happening? Because we live in a fallen world. Where would we be without the army of God around us? Paul had the army of God around him. Paul constantly had the presence of God with him. Paul was a man that wrote 13 books of the New Testament. God was the first missionary to go around the known world preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ. Paul, an awesome man of God that constantly had the presence of God. Paul raised the guy from the dead. Come on. Who can do that? Anybody here? No. Paul was that kind of guy. He had the presence of God continually with him, continually in him. And Paul said, oh, wretched man, I tell you what, this is my problem. What I should be doing, I'm not doing. And what I shouldn't be doing, I'm always doing. Paul says, I buffet my body daily. That's buffet, not buffet. I buffet my body daily to keep it in subjection because I know I'm flesh, but I'm in the presence of God, and the presence of God never leaves. And Paul said, I have learned to be what? Content in whatever state. Whatever state. You see, the presence of God never leaves us. The presence of God is always surrounding us. We just close our eyes to it. Like Elisha's servant. And all we see is the enemy. Secondly, we need to have our eyes open to see God's protection. This is what's amazing to me. Psalm 34 says, the angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him, and he delivers them. Yeah, that's what he did in this story. The angel of the Lord encamps around those that fear him, and they deliver them. The Bible speaks a lot about fearing God. Why? And I love what it says in Psalm 34. Because if we fear God and His commands, and we hold God in high esteem, if we put God above everything else in our lives, if we recognize that He's the only one that has control over our future, not us, if He does, then we don't need to fear Him. The only reason we fear Him is because we don't want Him to be in control of our future. Right? I'm not scared of God when I know He's got my plan and He's got my future. And I don't have a fear like terror of God when I know that His army is encamped around me. The thing that makes me fearful of God is when I know that and I say, no, I don't want you to be in charge. I'm going to do it my way. Anybody here ever look at God and just say, no, and willing to admit it? Afraid. Well, I was afraid of my mama, but it didn't keep me from back talking. One particular story, she's here, she can verify. She's in the kitchen doing mama stuff, you know. She's washing dishes, I believe. It sure tasted like it. And she walks in. I come in the kitchen. I'm 13-ish, you know, grown man. And Mama asked me to do something to help her. I don't remember what it was because a lot of this is fuzzy. She asked me to do something and help her in the kitchen. And I'm standing there looking at her because she's short. And I said, that's woman's work. And a soapy hand come out of the sink and hit me right there. And I was fearful of my mama. And I said, yes, ma'am, what do you want me to do? But my fear of my mother did not hinder me from showing my ignorance and doing it anyway. Our fear of God doesn't hinder us from thumbing our nose at God. So just being afraid of God because He's going to judge me or hit me with a soapy hand out of the sink, that's not reason. The fear of God is that I know He's got me. And I know that He has a plan and that every step that I take, God's going to be right there and His army is around me. And I don't have to fear Him because He knows where we're going. You see, God's protection is one of those interesting things that we say, well, what about all the people that have had bad accidents? Where was God then? All that. I'm going to tell you something. I don't have an answer for all your questions. But this I do know. You have no idea what God has protected you from. You have no idea. Neither do I. Another interesting story about me getting hit in the mouth. Not by my mother. When I was a junior or senior in high school, I was an auto mechanic. I don't remember. It's one of those 2 years. There again, there's a lot of fuzzy stuff from my high school days. I was in auto mechanics, and we were working on this truck because I took all the shop classes I could because that's what seemed intelligent. And I had 3 hours of auto mechanics, and we were overhauling the Ford Courier pickup. I remember it was green. And we brung it in. My partner in the shop class brung it in, drove it in. I put the air jack under it. We're going to lift it up, set it on jack stands, pull the motor, all of this. Normal stuff. He pulls it in, parks it. You always leave it neutral when you're going to put it on an air jack because as you lift the front end up, the back wheels have to roll forward so everything goes up. It's all smooth. I stick the air thing in there. Little truck comes up, gets up to about right here, jumps off the jack. Jack comes out from under the truck, hits me right in the mouth. Picks me up, seriously, this high off of the floor. Throws me back about 6 foot against the concrete block wall. Between 2 steel tables, workbenches. And there's a space between them that is my width. It was narrower then. But it's my width. I go between those 2 steel tables at a high rate of speed with the mouth busted, bleeding everywhere, smack my head off of the wall, go unconscious and slide down between the tables. From where I'm standing with the jack, a direct path back to the wall. The gap was over here. You call it what you ought to. You describe it how you want to. I still got hit in the mouth with a jack because I was stupid and didn't check the truck to make sure it was in neutral. My fault, not on God. This is not a direct path backwards from an impact. That I know God did something about. Don't know why, don't know how come. All I know is He did. What I'm saying is God's protection is continually surrounded. And I still had a mouth split wide open, stitches. I got a scar under all this awesome white hair. That's why I wear it. Had to eat potato soup through a straw for 3 weeks. Other side note on that, my dad and my friend that took me to the doctor to get my mouth sewed up stopped at Sonic afterwards to have lunch. That has nothing to do with the sermon, just thought I'd throw that out there. But God protects us, guys. Listen, God's biggest desire is for us to arrive safely home. Home. God's biggest desire is for us to arrive safely home. And it is a road that is dangerous. It is a road that is full of Syrian armies and firing chariots and all kinds of enemies with bows and arrows and guns and all sorts of things. And Satan desires to trip you, to destroy you, and to leave you laying maimed on the side of the road. God's desire is you arrive safely home. If you keep your eyes fixed on Jesus, you understand you will arrive safely home. Will you be battered? Possibly. Will you be bruised? Probably. Will you have scars? Absolutely. Will you arrive home? Yes. You see, God's not our enemy. God doesn't sit there and wait for you to mess up so He can pop you on the head. God doesn't want to see you defeated. God wants to surround you and encourage you and protect you. Third, we need to have our eyes open to God's provision. You know all this stuff I worked so hard all my life to gather up? Yeah, I didn't do that. You know why? Because I also know a lot of people around the world that's worked a lot harder than I have for a lot longer than I have, and they got nothing. Because there wasn't nothing to get. I spent several days in Mexico, actually a few years, but several days in one particular place. We were pouring a huge concrete pour in the mountains of Veracruz, and it was hot, like 100 plus hot. And back then I didn't like heat. Now heat's my friend. It was very hot and it was awful, and we were mixing concrete on the ground with shovels. Anybody ever done that? Get a big pile of gravel, a big pile of sand, add some cement water, and just... Well, we were mixing a yard at a time. Big pile, I'm talking a big pile of concrete, and we had like 15 of us, and it's kind of fun after a while, for a minute, and you get in a line, and you got the shovels, and you go around, and you're doing this, and everybody's making a circle. And the reason is because they're catching what you're missing, and you just keep going around, and you go around and around and around. You're stirring and stirring. We got this done. I watched these people work, and they worked, and they were singing, and I didn't know what they were singing until I asked, because they were singing in not Spanish. It was Totonaco, one of the 54 dialects in Mexico. But they were singing praise songs. Children of God, they were worshiping the Lord, and they're going. And they're mixing, and then they put it in 5-gallon buckets. The women set it on their heads, and they run up a ramp, because the pour is about 10 foot off the ground. They run it up a ramp barefoot with bucket on their head of concrete, hand it to the guy, he dumps it, hands it empty, they come down, and it's just this all day long, never stops, all day long, never stops. We keep going. Those people worked hard. They were praising God. They were doing everything. They earned something that day, and we had supper, and it was turkey, eggs, and tortillas. You see, we assume that all of the hard work we put in and all of the stuff that we've gathered up, all of the things that we've provided, we did. Oh, foolish people we are. Oh, foolish people. Well, I have worked hard, and I've been, yeah, well, God gave you a physical body that was able to work. You weren't born an invalid. God gave you a mind that was able to reason so that you could do that. You were born blessed of God. You were born in a place where you had opportunity before you to do it and resources to work with. And all of the things that we want to say we did, our provision comes from us. I worked hard and I bring home the bacon and I fry it up in the pan at my house. And I took care of all of this and I did this. And the truth is, God says, who are you? No, you didn't. Everything you've got is from my hand. We just studied Job last week on Wednesday night. If you don't believe everything we own is in the hand of God, read the book of Job. Because in one day, everything Job had was gone, except God's provision. God's provision. In this particular story, the army of God came and surrounded. And when the Lord opened the eyes of the army of Syria, they realized, oh, this is all bad. God provided them protection and God met their needs. The deliverance that the children of Israel had from the Syrians was not because Israel has a great army, not because Israel had a wise king. The deliverance that Israel got from the Syrian army is because Israel had an awesome God. God delivers us. God provides for us. God meets our needs. Too often I don't know what my needs are. Would you agree with me that you really don't know what you need? Oh, I have a long list of wants. She knows my long list of wants. But that's just, that's my pre-Dave Ramsey life. All I want now is financial peace. 6 months living expenses. Fully funded college education. Wait a minute, my kids are already out. Okay. We do have wants. God says, I'm going to meet your needs. And here's the cool thing. We say, well, what does that mean? Whatever we need, God's going to meet it. Here's the problem is we don't know what we need. We think we know what we need. We think that we know. We don't know what we need. And my needs change all the time. Do yours? There are some days that I need God to just pick me up and hold me in His arms like a trembling child in his mother's arms. I need God to embrace me, to hold me, say, I got it, it's okay. I need that from God. And sometimes I need God to reach His hand out of the sink and pop me in the mouth. And sometimes I need God to take stuff away from me that is hindering my relationship and my focus on God. Even stuff that I've worked hard to earn. I need Him to take that away. Sometimes I need God to put things in my life that keep me focused and grounded. You see, God is a God of provision. And in the children of Israel, He provided a prophet. He provided a king that would listen to the prophet in this particular instance. That was rare, but in this particular instance, He provided the army of God. God provides what we need. I think too often people give up on God because they don't get what they want. And life doesn't work out the way they think it should. And they've prayed and prayed and prayed about this and it just doesn't happen. So God, and I've had this said to me, word for word, I've tried the God thing, it just doesn't work for me. Really? You see, God knows our needs. Jesus reminds us in Matthew chapter 6, the famous passage about seek ye first the kingdom of heaven and seek ye first the kingdom of God. Depends on which version you're reading. I've got 6 in my head. Not all memorized, but they run together. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and His righteousness. And all of these things. And he mentions before what it means. Don't worry about what you eat. Don't worry about where you sleep. Don't worry about what you wear. Don't worry. All of these things God will add to you. He'll take care of it. Nobody here this morning showed up hungry. If you did, it was immediately fixed. And if you're still hungry after church, hang out. There's still biscuits and gravy. God meets needs. But so often we only recognize the provision of God in the spirit or in the physical sense when the greatest need we have is spiritual. We only recognize the provision of God in the physical. Our greatest need is in the spiritual. I need God to hold me accountable to His Word. I need God to teach me from His Word, His path. I need God to hold me, to release me at times. I need the provision of God that grows my spirit and frees me to be a servant. I don't know where you're at today. I don't know how you see the world, but I know most of the time when I look at the world, I don't have my eyes open, not my spiritual eyes. I look through the flesh, and I look for fleshly solutions to spiritual problems. I look for fleshly armies to attack a spiritual army. Paul said, hey, we are in this battle, and we wrestle not against what? Flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers, against a spiritual army. And I want to say this, if you have put Christ as the head of your heart, the head of your life, the head of your home, if you've got the Jesus fish somewhere on you, you've got a target on your back. It's a big target. And the enemy will shoot at it every day. Every day. But we have an army surrounding us. I've thought several ways of how I wanted to end this sermon, and I don't want to do it in a light-hearted way, but in a childlike truth. If we could just accept and grasp the truths that we know and put them in our heart like children do. And you know what? I started to name this sermon, not Eyes Wide Open, but God is bigger than the boogeyman. Because the truth, when it boils down to, in this instance, with the armies and the king of Syria surrounding Israel, God's bigger than the boogeyman. So why do we fear? Why do we tremble in the face of adversity? Why does the enemy so easily attack when the army of God is encamped around us? What's your battle today? Will you let God release you and surround you with His presence, with His power, His provision? You let God be God.